I learned to measure love in receipts long before anyone admitted it out loud. Not because my parents were cruel or calculating, but because every good thing we did for each other had a price stapled quietly to the back. When Mom's knees started to ache and Dad began losing his breath halfway up the stairs, the price became obvious. They needed out of the old split level with the steep staircase and the narrow tub. They needed a place with grab bars, wide hallways, an elevator if possible, a clinic close enough that a cab ride wouldn't feel like a journey. I told myself it wasn't a sacrifice to help them, it was a privilege. I had worked hard, said no to 1,000 small comforts, built my transport business mile by mile until the numbers looked like something a boy from our street could be proud of. So when I started touring retirement communities and one-story homes with ramps and light-filled kitchens, it felt like the next honest thing to do. I took notes. I asked about emergency call buttons and HOA bylaws and whether pets were allowed because my mother would not live without a cat. I asked if the walking paths were paved and if the dining hall served soup that tasted like actual chicken, not a memory of it. I learned the names of the concierges, and I watched the way the residents smiled when the receptionists knew their coffee orders. The place I picked didn't look like a compromise. It looked like a reward. Sun warmed the common room at 9 in the morning, the indoor pool smelled faintly of chlorine and lemon cleaner, and the library had a wall of windows where the light would hit the spines just so. The cottage I put under contract had a front porch big enough for 2 rocking chairs and a view of a small pond that hosted bossy ducks. Inside, there were wide doorways, a step-in shower with a bench, a laundry closet where the machines sat higher so no one had to bend. It was not cheap. It was, in fact, the size of a decision you look at twice before you sign. But I had the money. And besides, the number was easier to look at than the last time I'd ignored the slope of my father's shoulders, as he pretended the stairs were not winning. I didn't tell my younger brother right away. We're less than 3 years apart but grew like vines in opposite directions. Michael has always been the lighter one, the charming laugh, the big ideas, the way of standing just close enough to responsibility that people assume he's holding it. I've been the quiet one, the spreadsheet, the early morning, the text you send when you want something done and not discussed. He loved our parents. He did. He just loved them more when there were people around to notice. I brought Mom and Dad to see the cottage one afternoon when the sky was clean and the ducks were loud. Mom cried when she stepped into the kitchen and saw the window over the sink. "I can see the pond while I wash," she said, as if the glass itself had been installed for her. Dad walked the hallway, bouncing his hand off each doorframe like he was testing a new glove. He sat on the shower bench and nodded like a man who knew when something was built right. "Son," he said and stopped. He's always been careful with gratitude, measuring it to fit the moment so it never spilled. I told them there would be no mortgage. I had saved for years. I had planned for this. The title company office was bright and impersonal on closing day. I signed where they told me to sign, and the cashier's check looked like a miracle with a memo line. I held the keys in my palm like a coin you rub for luck. Mom insisted on taking a picture in front of the cottage, one of those shaky phone photos where the faces are too big and the sky is a stripe. She kept touching my cheek like I might change if she looked away. "You shouldn't have," she said, which is a sentence that lets gratitude and protest hold hands. I should have stopped there, enjoyed the move-in, worried about the small things like where the toaster would live and whether the living room rug needed a different color. But a week later, while I was talking to the community's office about getting the emergency contact paperwork updated after the sale, the manager's assistant flipped a folder open and read out loud, "Primary owner of record, Michael Parker." She didn't even look up. She just read the words the way people read weather. The noise in my head was soft at first, like a TV in a neighbor's apartment, then suddenly close. "I'm sorry," I said, and my mouth felt full of a language I didn't recognize. "Could you repeat that?" She did. Slowly. Kindly. "Michael. My brother. My name wasn't there. Not even as a co-owner. Sometimes families do that," she offered, as if she had been trained to bandage this exact kind of wound. Avoids probate. Keeps it simple. I drove to the old house and didn't turn off the engine. Mom saw me through the window and came out fast, cardigan flapping, hair not yet set from the morning shower. "You're early," she said, which is something you say to argue with a clock when the person at your door has the wrong face. I didn't sit. "Why is Michael on the deed?" I asked. Dad came to the top of the steps and stopped like his feet had been told to wait. Mom's mouth opened and then did not find a word. "We were going to tell you," she said, and that is a kind of telling in itself. "We thought, he's the younger one. He has a family. It would be security. Security looks different depending on whose door is locked." I should have yelled. I should have asked them what number they had attached to my years of. "I got it, don't worry." What symbol they had used to measure how many times I had been the first call when a car broke down, or a prescription needed picking up, or a roof decided it had had enough of being a roof. Instead, I sat down on the top step next to my father and counted each slow breath so my voice would be mine and not something borrowed from fire. "I bought that house," I said. "I wrote the check." "You know I did." Dad didn't meet my eyes. He looked at my hands instead, the way men do when a conversation has turned into a tool they don't know how to use. "You'll understand when you have your own family," he said, which is a sentence that contains so many assumptions you could build a fence from them. Michael arrived later with that smile that has always been too big for his face. "You okay?" he asked, as if he were checking on a neighbor after a storm he had watched from his own porch. "We figured it made sense," he said when the words finally had to be spoken. "Paperwork-wise. And you know, I'm around more. I can handle things." He leaned against the doorframe the way people lean when they don't want the conversation to think they're serious. "You're good at money," he added, as if this compliment might be a bridge when he had already burned the road. For 2 days I was a jar someone had turned too tight. Every thought squeaked. Every memory rattled. I made lists because lists have lines and lines can keep you from falling. What I owed. What I had. What I could stop doing. I did not call. I did not text. Mom left me a voicemail where she cried pretty, and I pressed play 3 times just to remind myself that even tears can be edited. I started the quietest plan of my life by doing nothing loud. I canceled the recurring grocery deliveries I'd set up for their cottage. I called the lawn service and asked them to send the bill to the address on the deed. I emailed the community office and removed my card from the autopay for the monthly fees. I told myself that love without boundaries had turned into a pocket with a hole, and I had kept reaching into it like an idiot and wondering where the change went. I didn't stop visiting. That would have been easy and cheap. I visited on Tuesdays instead of Sundays, brought my own coffee because the kitchen felt like a showroom where I was a customer without a credit score. I talked to Mom about the cat and to Dad about the pond. I asked Michael if he'd found a handyman he liked and watched him bluff without even getting the number of cards right. I waited. It didn't take long. 3 months later, my brother called me at 7:12 a.m., his emergency voice on vibrate. "Hey man, quick thing. Property taxes came. They're higher than I expected." He laughed in that way that's meant to sound like we're both in on the joke. "You know how these counties are. Can you spot it this time? I'll, pay you back when the bonus hits." It was a number that wouldn't ruin me but would rearrange my week. "That document with your name on it?" I said. "It's your bill." He pivoted so fast his ankle must have hurt a pop. "Come on," he said. "You know how we do things. You take care of the boring stuff. I take care of people." I could hear the TV in the background and the metallic clink of a spoon against a bowl and the sound of someone who had never had to build a floor believing floors were everywhere. "No," I said, and even I was impressed with the shape of the word. He hung up and texted Mom. Mom texted me. "We didn't mean for it to be this way," she wrote. "We just thought it would be simpler." Simpler for whom is a question that should appear on tax forms. When you stop paying for things people assumed you always would, you become suddenly interesting. Dad called to tell me the HOA had fined them for a shrub that dared to grow like shrubs grow. They said you always handled those notices, he said, like he was telling me a story about a man we both used to know. The notice went to the owner, I replied, and left the rest of the sentence unpainted. Rachel, no, wrong story. In this one, my only sister is the absence of a sister, a space where a different kind of ally might have stood. I ate my dinners at my own table and learned the pleasure of a quiet fork. I started building something for myself. Not revenge. A life. I bought a narrow lot on a street that still had mailboxes you could actually open without a fob. I designed a small house with high windows and a long desk that looked out over the world I could afford to love. I signed papers with my own name, and didn't hand the pen to anyone after. If you had asked me why I didn't shout, why I didn't lawyer up and turn the deed into a weapon, I would have told you that sometimes the sharpest thing you can do is stop being the cushion for someone else's landing. Michael doubled down the way charm does when it realizes it won't be accepted as currency. He took Mom and Dad to brunch and then posted pictures of pancakes he didn't pay for. He showed up at the cottage with a toolbox and tightened screws that didn't need tightening. He called me to ask about a quick loan to cover the HOA fee while he sorted things. I said no and hung up and put my phone face down and took a deep breath in a room where the only thing that depended on me was a plant that would forgive me if I forgot to water it on a Tuesday. It got worse before it got honest. Mom invited me for Sunday dinner after a month of Tuesdays. The table was set for 4 and there were 5 of us, which is a metaphor I didn't have to build. Michael had opinions about the roast and the thermostat, and the correct way to coil the hose after you water the ferns. Halfway through the meal, Dad said, "We've decided it would be best if your name were on a few of the recurring accounts. Michael's busy. You're good at this kind of thing." My name, I said, wasn't good enough for the deed. It's not a spare tire for the bills. The silence that followed was one I recognized from childhood, the one that lands when you say something that can't be unsaid. Michael pushed his chair back, the legs making a noise the floor did not deserve. "You're being petty," he said. "This is about family. Family would have asked me before they put your name on my gift," I said. "Family would have looked me in the eye." He laughed without humor. "You've always been a wallet with shoes," he said, and the honesty of it lit the room. I went home and sat in the dark and let the anger move through me like weather that would not apologize. Then I wrote an invitation. Not a text. A card, because cards imply intention. I invited them to dinner at my place, my new place, not yet fully furnished, the paint still smelling like a choice. "Come see what I've been building," I wrote. "Come early, I want to watch the light change." Mom called to ask what she could bring. "Just yourselves," I said, and she heard the weight of it. They arrived like people walking into a room that had been waiting for them. The facade of the house is plain, clean lines, good proportions, a porch where 2 people can sit without bumping knees. Inside, I had decided to keep the furniture minimal, a long dining table, 6 sturdy chairs, shelves with books that have earned their place. The kitchen was honest, no fake islands made to impress. The living room had a couch that forgave you if you fell asleep on it. My favorite part was the long desk under the window, the one that looked out at the maple tree that will be enormous when I am old, if we both do our jobs. Mom touched the wall the way people touch gravestones, with the pads of her fingers, gentle. Dad walked to the window and measured the view with his breath. Michael scanned the room like a realtor calculating a commission. "Didn't realize you had it like this," he said, and that it had nothing to do with square footage. I had cooked too much food again, old habits, I suppose, but the table looked right with dishes marching down the center. We ate. We pretended. We let small talk do what it does best, which is miss the point. Halfway through, when the light did exactly what I had hoped it would do, slanted across the table and turned the soup into something that glowed, I told them I bought their cottage because I wanted them safe. I told them I learned about the deed from a woman in an office who probably has this conversation once a month with a son whose hands do what mine did. I told them I cancelled the payments because I am done being invisible and indispensable at the same time. I told them that what hurt wasn't the paper. It was the way they made a decision about my love without me. Mom cried in the way that makes you want to fix a problem you didn't create. Dad looked smaller. Michael rolled his shoulders like he was getting ready to change lanes without signaling. I set up a trust, I said, and the word landed on the table with a sound only I heard. My house is in it. So are the accounts that keep my lights on and my life moving. My name is on my things, and no one else's name will be added for convenience, optics, or leverage. Michael smirked. Paranoid much? Protected, I said. There's a difference. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The room was on my side. I'm not punishing you, I added, and watched Mom's shoulders release a half-inch. I'm correcting a boundary. Michael turned to our parents and did the thing he's always done, looked for a referee. So that's it, he said. He gets to walk away. Dad surprised me. He's not walking away, he said, slow as a nail set with one hit. He's standing where we should have asked him to stand from the beginning. Mom wiped her eyes. We were afraid, she whispered. Afraid of what happens when we're gone. Afraid of making it harder for your brother than it already is. You made it harder for me now, I said, and there was no heat in it, only math. After dessert, which no one tasted, I showed them the desk and the view and the drawer where I keep the letters that matter. I showed them the quiet room at the back where I read after dinner. I showed them the fuse box because Dad cares about that kind of thing, and he ran his hand along the labeling like it was poetry. I walked them to the door, and Mom hugged me like the hallway was a lifeboat. You did a beautiful thing, she said into my shoulder. I know we made an ugly choice. I told her there was still time to make beautiful ones. She nodded the way people do when they don't trust their voice. Michael didn't hug me. He looked at the porch light and said, Nice place, and left like a man who expected the door to close behind him, and wasn't wrong. I wish I could tell you everything changed the next day. People like stories where a moment does the heavy lifting. What actually happened is slower and made of smaller pieces. Michael paid the taxes late and learned that late has a fee. The HOA fined him again for the shrub, and he bought clippers and learned how to sweat. Mom started calling me on Tuesdays to ask if I wanted to walk the path by the pond with her, and I said yes as if it were something more valuable than money, because it is. Dad found the handyman himself, and showed him the list he had made in pencil, with boxes to check off, and I loved him for the boxes. They began inviting me on Sundays again, and sometimes I went, and sometimes I told them I had plans, and both answers were accepted without anyone slamming a metaphorical door. A month later, Michael stood on my porch with a look I hadn't seen since we were kids, and he had split his lip on the fence. I messed up, he said. The insurance. I forgot. They sent a letter. He held it out like a man holding a live thing. I'll cover it, I said, and watched his eyebrows jump. This time. And then I'll show you how to put it on autopay with your card because I'm not your parachute. He nodded, actually nodded, and when I set the laptop on the table, he sat and paid a bill with his own information, and if that sounds small to you, I don't think you understand how families work. In the fall, Mom sent me a picture of a bird I couldn't name sitting on the cottage fence. Your father says it's a warbler, she wrote. I say it's company. On Thanksgiving, we ate at the big dining hall because the cottage stove was being fussy, and Michael brought a pie he had actually baked, badly, and we ate it anyway. Dad told a story about a game he watched in 1978 as if the outcome might change this time, and I realized the real inheritance I wanted was this impossible, ordinary noise. I still look at the copies of the closing documents sometimes, the ones with a name that isn't mine sitting where I thought mine would be. I still feel a heat in my chest when I think of that first conversation on the steps, my father looking at my hands instead of my face. But then I step out onto my own porch and watch the maple barter with the light, And I remember that the quietest revenge is not a gotcha or a headline, it's a life arranged so cleanly around your values that no one can mistake where you stand. When I told Michael I wouldn't pay the taxes he assumed I would, when I took my name off their bills and put it on my door, when I cooked too much food and invited them to eat under a light that made the soup glow, those were the moments that changed us. Not court filings. Not shouting. Just choices set down carefully like tiles until a pattern emerged. If you came looking for a scene where I take the deed and tear it into confetti, I don't have it for you. What I have is a Tuesday where my mother and I walked the path by the pond and the ducks pretended they didn't care about us until they did. What I have is a Sunday where my father asked me to help him change a smoke detector battery, and then let me stand on the chair while he held it, and I pretended I needed the help. What I have is a brother who learned that an adult life contains numbers and that someone will love you enough to say no. What I have is a house that smells like coffee in the morning and wood in the afternoon, and something like relief in the evening. I paid for my parents' retirement home and they put my younger brother's name on the deed. That sentence used to feel like a verdict. Now it feels like a prologue I had to read twice to understand the book. The last time I visited their cottage, the shrub was trimmed neatly, and the cat had claimed the end of the couch like an empire. Mom made soup that tasted like actual chicken and pressed leftovers into my hands like a benediction. Dad walked me to the door and, without prompting, said, "We should have asked you." It was the closest thing to an apology he knows how to make, and I received it the way you receive rain in a dry month, without analysis. When I got home, I stood in my kitchen and tapped the face of my watch to hear it tick. I set 2 mugs on the counter out of habit, and then put one away. I opened the window and let in the sound of my street, the low constant of other people getting on with it. If anyone had been there to ask me what revenge tastes like, I would have handed them a bowl of soup and said, "Quiet.